אוקיי. את מעדיפה בעברית או באנגלית?
I don't know, we could start in one and אפשר להגיד בעברית, או מה זה יותר טוב בשביל האנשים?
זה לא משנה, מה שנוח לך.
Probably English.
English? Okay.
Probably.
Okay. So I would like you to tell the story of your immigration or Aliyah, however you define it, like in a family context.
First of all, I was quite newly married. When we came on Aliyah, I'd been married only 2.5 years, and I had a baby. My husband already spoke Hebrew. So when we got to Israel, we weren't put into an ulpan or anything because he spoke Hebrew. He had a job anyway. So I never really learned Hebrew from basics, let's start with. I came here without expectations actually, or very low expectations, because the Israelis that I'd met overseas, young marrieds, lived in such a, what I thought was a low standard, perhaps 4 children and a 1-bedroom flat, and I didn't expect terribly much more. Friends, we had friends in Israel already from the youth movement, but no family. Yes, I did have my family. My husband's mother lived here at the time. So I wasn't really expecting a miracle country or that we'd be wonderfully comfortable, but we were very much like any other young couples just starting out. We did get a 2-bedroom flat, and of course the language was one of the hardest problems for me with Aliyah. Although I went to different ulpanim before I came, my Hebrew was really non-existent, and it was learned from a book called Elef Milim, and that was just about my vocabulary, Elef Milim. But even then, that frustrated me the most. But I found everything terribly strange. I'd already immigrated once. I was born in Australia, and we immigrated to Canada for 2 years for work experience for my husband. But that was an English-speaking country. I had no family there at all, but we made friends, and there was a library in English, and the television programs were in English. There was television, which there wasn't in Israel. So when I came to Israel, the hardest thing was, it was so new, everything was different, the culture and the people, and people were very nice, and they all wanted to speak English with me, which was fine. I didn't want to push my poor Hebrew, but it was very frustrating. What else is relevant with that? I had my thoughts all sorted out, but now they seem to have gone. For example, I felt I lost not only my language but my culture too. There was no reference, although I had a little baby girl growing up, and she went to kindergarten. It'll stop in a minute. I'm sorry. Okay. The nursery rhymes, the songs she sung in kindergarten, were unfamiliar to me. And of course, all the nursery rhymes I knew in English, and stories, which she listened to, which were fine. We spoke English at home, but it was strange for her too. So I felt that any reference that I might have to, if I spoke to anyone, a Shakespeare character, for example. Not that Israelis didn't learn Shakespeare, but not at the depth that I had. Not that sounds terribly intellectual, which is not what I mean, but any reference was just, everything was strange for people I was talking to and people talking to me. And I found that was the hardest thing. We were lucky because we moved into new area, a new development. So everyone who moved there was new. So that was good, and everyone, almost everyone, were young couples with young children. And I found there a lot of Anglo-Saxons, and they really became family and certainly good friends. We celebrated together, whether it was Yom Ha'atzmaut or Jewish holidays, and we had Leila Seder together, and everything we did was mostly with this Anglo-Saxon group. But there were still very big frustrations. I'd go by bus with my baby to Tel Aviv, and I get bus sick. So I had the window open so I wouldn't be sick. And of course everyone is telling me, and I could understand but couldn't say anything, they're telling me it's not good for the baby. You've got the baby with the wind blowing on her. In the end, the only word I could think of, I turned around and said to everyone around me, "Shtuyot!" It's the only word I could think of in Hebrew. But I couldn't, anyway, everyone laughed and everyone took it very well. But it was always this frustration of, why do I have to explain myself all the time? And, but the people were kind about it. I don't think my husband understood the problems of Aliyah for me, because he was a Hebrew speaker. He was born in Israel, lived many years overseas, but he spoke Hebrew and he had work. He went to work every day, and I had to struggle to go to the supermarket, not being able to read the labels. I ended up asking friends in Australia to send me things which are very common here, but I didn't know what they were called and I didn't know who to ask. Some of my Anglo-Saxon friends didn't know what I was talking about either. Because I liked to cook and I was using ingredients perhaps they hadn't heard of. But I couldn't find it in the supermarket. So language, I think, was the biggest problem. But it wasn't all bad. I found that I was, it was okay. I don't think I felt very different from if I'd been newly married in Australia or Canada, because when you're finding your own way as a young couple anyway, it's there are certain problems. I felt comfortable in Israel. I never felt anti-Semitism in Australia, very rarely. But I remember the feeling there of envying some of my very good friends there, saying, I wonder what it would be like to be an Anglo-Saxon Protestant, white, just belong to a majority. And here I was in Israel, part of a majority. And that was good. It was a good feeling. But I was never very settled, and I always had something to cling to, because Danny, my husband, had a 3-year contract, after which, if he or I, if we weren't happy here, we would be repatriated, that they would pay, the company would pay. So I always had this to cling to, and sure enough, and we came here in 1964, 1967 was the end of the 3 years, but what happened was the 6-Day War. So my parents sent me airline tickets for me and the children to go to Australia, or to get out of Israel, which I didn't take. I felt it was necessary for me to be here. And as it happened, it really was. And that, after the 6-Day War, I went to Australia for a holiday, and I realised then that my place was here in Israel. It was
How did you realize
good.
that? How did you realize it?
Perhaps because I felt more part of Israel by then. I'd been through a war. I'd experienced bombing. We lived in Kiryat Arba. I could see from Petach Tikva, I could see behind Petach Tikva bombs in the lights, explosions. Also, the husband of my very, very best friend was killed in the 6-Day War. So I was here for her. So that also made a big difference. I felt part of Israel. And I went back to Australia and I didn't feel part of Australia, for the society. So what else can I tell you?
You feel that the fact that the war happened right when you were at the end of the contract made a difference, you say?
Definitely. definitely. I don't know how I would have thought otherwise. I know my husband didn't want to leave Israel, so that would have been a marriage problem as well. But I realised I wanted to stay with him, and I wanted to stay here in Israel. And it was good that I went to Australia and I saw, and I had nothing in common, very little in common with my friends that I'd left behind. And my family was growing as my family, and about that time my other members of the family came. My brother came on Aliyah. He came first as a volunteer in '64, and later on my parents, 10 years later, my parents came on Aliyah. So, yeah, it was, I can't imagine now being anywhere else. There are a lot of things, obviously, that I don't like, most people don't like, about their country, their government, the way things are. But that doesn't matter, because here I feel part of it. If I vote, it means something. In Australia, I don't know if I'd have felt like that. I was too young to vote when I left Australia. I feel that I can look at the problems in the world and be upset about it, but it doesn't touch my heart. And things that go wrong here are very bad. And I feel part of Israel. I'll always be an Anglo-Saxon. My Hebrews, I understand. I still can't read or write terribly fluently. I read too fast in English to bother in Hebrew. I read 2 or 3 books a week, and and at the beginning that was a problem. Where do I get books in English? But thank goodness we formed this Anglo-Saxon group, and we had book clubs and changed books, and so that was my.
Tell me a little bit about your origin family, really, in Australia.
My parents, it's rather interesting. My father was an out-and-out Anglo-Saxon. Although all my grandparents were born in Poland, neither of my parents were born in Poland. My father was born in South Africa, but he came to Australia as a small child. His parents were real wandering Jews. They had 7 or 8 children in different countries. And he was very Anglo-Saxon, very Jewish conscious. He fought for Jewish causes in Australia. They were very left-wing, my parents. My mother came as a refugee from Germany. They got out at the last minute. They got out just before Kristallnacht from Germany into Holland as refugees, and eventually got a visa to Australia. And my mother and father married. We were always very conscious of being Jewish, but not. I don't remember Israel being talked about. It was not on my radar particularly. My mother was very European, very cultured, art, literature. My father was self-taught in those fields, and they were very active in the Jewish community as far as anti-fascism. And my mother had a sister, one sister who was living in Moscow throughout the Second World War. She lived and died there. So they were very active in Jewish Soviet causes. And
when, sorry.
Yeah.
Because you moved to Canada, you said before, right?
Yep.
So you're already far from your family, but
Yes.
But still, when you told them that you've decided to move to Israel, what were their responses?
They were actually, they probably didn't come as that much of a surprise at the time, because I started to go to a youth movement, Beitar, which was very ideologically against their principles. Mm-hmm. But my parents' attitude was, well, you rather meet some Jewish boys, even if they're from Beitar, than go out with non-Jews. And Danny had already said, before we even started going out together, he was going to go back to Israel one day. And so when we started dating, my parents probably thought, well, it was on the cards. So it was a tremendous emotional problem for my mother, especially, because when she left Germany and Holland at age 18, she never saw her friends again, or any family that was left. So when we were saying goodbye, she felt it was goodbye. Even a telephone overseas phone call was so expensive, we didn't do it very often. And it was a different world. There wasn't Skype and there wasn't WhatsApp. And I wrote to my parents for every week for 10 years, which I pat myself on the shoulder for, to keep them informed. And they were able to visit us in Israel a couple of times before they decided to come, because their only children and grandchildren were here in Israel. Not because they were Zionists, God forbid. And funnily enough, my mother was good with languages, so she spoke some Hebrew, kitchen Hebrew, but she spoke enough Hebrew to follow instructions on packets of food and to listen to what people were saying. My father never got past Kita Aleph, no matter how many Ulpanim he went to. It was just difficult. But he said he felt very comfortable being in Israel. He said he didn't fight anti-Semitism in Australia, although he grew up at a time when there was more than when I did. But he said, like I always felt, I wanted to know what it was like to be part of the majority in a country. He said he felt at home in Israel. So that was good. They came. But,
Do you feel that because you have one brother, right?
yes.
And he came here and then your parents followed?
Yes.
Do you feel that being all of you here changed your dynamic? Was your family dynamic different than it was in Australia, do you feel?
It's hard to say because I was a teenager. I married very young. And I didn't live an independent life when I was in Australia.
Right.
That I learned to live when I was in Canada, and I had a baby in a strange country, but I spoke the language. To have a baby here in Israel when I didn't speak the language was a bit of a challenge. But got over that. Tom was the second one. The first one was born. Having my parents here, look, it was wonderful, but you take things so much for granted. It wasn't a matter of thinking, oh, now things are going to be different, or they were so different. It meant more family time. We always had Friday night dinners together at the house of one of either my sister-in-law, my brother, or my parents, or we took it in turns. And holidays and so on. It was nice, I think, for my children too to have grandparents here, although Danny's mother was here, but she was very involved with the sick husband. So. Excuse me.
Who was, sorry?
My mother-in-law. So she was, although she would have liked to help, and I got on very well with her, she really wasn't much help. When I wanted to go to Ulpan, she said she'd look after the baby, but it didn't last very long because her husband needed her and didn't like her to be out of function. You're not functioning for every day she was babysitting, so various reasons. It was good to have my parents from that point of view, and my brother. But my brother and sister-in-law went back to Australia after 30 years because their children returned to Australia. It's a shame.
So they didn't really, the children didn't, what's the word?
Their children were all born here, but after the army they all went to visit. They all went to visit Australia, and eventually each one and the three of them stayed in Australia. So my brother went there too.
And how did the two of you meet? In Beitar?
Yes. Although we'd known each other, it was in Beitar. We didn't know each other since we were teenagers. I was a young teenager. He was an old man at the time to me, a few years older.
And you knew already from the start that he would want to move to Israel?
Yes, but I didn't think it through. you know, we were dating and doing things in Australia, and the fact that one day, just a second, Danny, do you have to do that now? It's going to be...
Am I disturbing you?
A little bit, it's crackling.
Okay, so you'll have to have lunch later.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yes, what was I saying about thinking about Aliyah? Not really, but I could see the way it was drifting, but it was a very nebulous, a very distant idea, Israel. I didn't know very much about it. I had one girlfriend who one day after school said to me, "Oh, look, there was a big sign. There used to be posters for newspapers, and it said, 'Israel at war.'" This was in 1956, it was the Sinai campaign. So I looked at her and says, "So what's it got to do with us?" She said, "It's Israel. Israel's at war." Her family were very Zionist and she was very aware, and I was completely unaware. That was the same girlfriend whose husband was killed in the Six-Day War. So Israel was an idea. I mean, I asked people, what do you do? What do you eat? I was, horrified at the idea. My friends wrote, "Well, you've got to be careful with the chicken. You've got to still pluck off feathers from the chicken." Horrible thought. And everyone eats olives, and I didn't like olives. It was only little things like that. And living in a small flat and not having a car. We had a car, a small car, and we were very happy with our little flat. Because all our friends, the people we knew, were much the same position when we came to Israel. So as I said at the beginning, my expectations weren't very high. And we kept looking at each other, gee, we're so much better off than we thought we would be. So, but the idea of Aliyah before that was, it's an adventure, you're young, you don't know how bad things can be. War, what does that mean? First time I heard an air raid siren, one of my friends said, "I wonder what an air raid siren sounds like." I said, "That's what it sounds like." It was going. We had no idea.
When it first came to the table to actually move, what were your thoughts, feelings about it?
An adventure. It was mixed because, after all, we didn't live together in those days. We didn't live together either. So here I was, getting married, going away with a strange man to a strange country, that's to Canada, and not even to Israel, knowing that one day we'll also go to Israel. But you can young and not. I didn't think very deeply about it. I don't think. I could see how distressed my mother was, particularly. And so I promised I'd write every week.
And kept it.
Yeah. And those around me, quite a few of our friends from Beitar, also came on Aliyah, some before, some after. So we had a built-in chevra, which was very helpful.
Community.
Yeah. And those who'd been here longer helped those who came later, and gave us advice, and so it was very mixed emotionally coming here, but not that I thought that deeply of it. And it wasn't that traumatic being here, but I can't say that I fell in love with Israel straight away. As I said, I had my doubts all along, but I always had this safety net that I could leave in 3 years if I needed to. But didn't need to.
And how did it change your relationship, do you feel, moving here?
No, I don't know if it changed it at all, because Danny was so sure of himself and so sure going to Israel was the right thing, and he was always an ardent Zionist, as far as that Israel was the place for Jews to be. So I don't think I thought so independently at the time, you know. I accepted what he said, what other people said. I didn't question things very deeply. There were times when I was very distressed, and I can't think if that was because of Aliyah or because newly married.
New mom.
That's right. You know, it's very hard to say why, and I didn't think too deeply about it. I did go to a counsellor who tried to, when I think back on it, tried to help me realise that, but no, I didn't think deeply enough about things at the time. But,
And you said at the beginning, you know, raising three girls, right? Or three
I've got four.
Four, right?
And a boy.
Right, 3 girls and a boy.
4 girls and a boy.
4 girls and a boy. Forgot that. So you said about, you know, like the culture being different, and them, you know, growing up in that culture, and you having a different one. How do you feel that it influenced your relationship with them?
With the children. First of all, they all speak very good English, and so do my grandchildren. So that I'm very pleased about. I don't know how much it's due to me. At the beginning, I couldn't speak enough Hebrew. I could say things, but I couldn't say, you know, no, don't do that. I couldn't say that in Hebrew. I had to say that in English. And then I wanted them to speak English, so they weren't sure whether I understood enough Hebrew anyway. So they capitulated, not me. They spoke English. And I think my relationship with them all is good, but I don't think it had anything to do with being in Israel or not. Whatever problems we had or didn't have, I don't think it was being in Israel. It was, I mean, I had some very good excuses. I couldn't help them with their homework, except in English, which they didn't need. Even in maths, I didn't know the concepts in Hebrew, which in a way let me off the hook, because I could make sure they did their homework, but that's all. There were certain norms that I brought from home. We used to have our main meal in the evening, not at lunchtime, and we'd all sit down together. By the time even I had 5 children, the 7 of us would sit down every single night. Danny would come home and we'd have a family meal every single night, a hot cooked meal. And later on, when it was going out on a Friday night, the children knew first they had dinner with us. Later on, when they were older, they could go out after dinner. I think my relationship was much the same to some of the things that I brought with me, like meals in the evening and sitting together as a family were important to me.
Did you ever feel that your norms and the norms that the children were getting from their teachers, their friends, the society, did they ever collide with each other?
Yes, probably. Yes, there were times, there were things that perhaps over meals, I wasn't used to having children come home from school with my children and wanting to eat. And I certainly wasn't going to feed the neighbourhood, and especially since we didn't have a big meal, it didn't matter because we'd have something light at lunchtime when they came from school. But that startled me. I didn't particularly like that, but it wasn't a thing that I said to the children, you can't bring your friends home. I'm not going to feed them, but I didn't like it. It was only small things like that. It was. I don't think there was anything.
Do you remember any other examples like that?
Purim I took very seriously. I made all their costumes for them. But that was also a time when people didn't go out